first of all, should we say the F word in the title?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Always.
absolutely.
It is Kevin Can Fuck Himself.
So the show is sometimes described as classic sitcom meets Breaking Bad. Do you think it's a fair description?
It is definitely half a classic sitcom. We did not reinvent the wheel here. We were kind of commenting more on the wheel. I'm glad that people want to compare it to something so seminal and so wonderful, but you know, Allison is not Walter White. She's Allison. And I am really kind of proud of that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think maybe I agree with Valerie that it's lovely to be compared to something that's had such an impact, you know, but this is such a show from such a female perspective, and Breaking Bad is so very, very male.
Speaking of a female perspective, what was it about the sitcom wife that made you want to tell her story?
Well, I grew up watching every sitcom available to me. My mother would say that I could tell what time it is based on what show was on. And then one day I was listening to a podcast where these two women comedians were talking about going out every year for the sitcom wife, and how every year they're told this time they want a really funny woman to play the wife. They want a really funny woman. And then they would get the sides for the audition, and all of their lines would be things like, what do you mean? Like, just set up for the men. And I thought, oh my God, I bet that wife is miserable. And I sort of thought back on every sitcom I grew up watching and suddenly could imagine a murderous rage behind every sitcom wife's eyes. And it kind of grew from there. I thought, I want to see her story. I'm so done with his. I've seen his 1,000 times. I want to know hers.
No, I mean, we've seen his 1,000 times, and to the point where we accept everything bad that he does as funny. And I think that's, you know, that's part of it too, is like, yeah, same as Valerie. I grew up watching sitcoms through, we had a TV at my dinner table and we would watch sitcoms through dinner. But yeah, no, I mean, to the point where it becomes second nature, where it's like, I accept totally what is happening here as funny. It's a joke, like from the earliest sitcoms to now. Anything.
And even the sitcoms where wives get a theoretical backbone, their backbone is laughed at. Like, yes, Jill on Home Improvement and Leah Remini on King of Queens, like, fought back a little bit and like gave it as good as she got, but he gets the laughs. And her theoretical pain that she's expressing, we just laugh at. We never take it seriously. So I think, to me, it was just kind of rife with opportunity to get into some feelings that women tend to have.
Yeah, and I grew up in Australia, and I also grew up on a diet of multicams. So I think multicam is something that transcends America, and America has spread it wide. That laughter is well known everywhere, and I think I associated very much with American humor that I laughed along with, because I just thought it was super, super funny, and I still love it. But I think the multicam is something that's sort of internationally understood, so that the whole world is laughing at the women, and sort of buying this whole sort of system of comedy is fascinating.
And how did you pick Annie Murphy for the role?
Oh God, saying that we picked her makes it sound like she picked us. I mean, we got so lucky. I had Allison in my head for a really long time. And we saw, I feel like absolutely everybody for not just Allison, but for Patty and every other role that we had. We really wanted to, we didn't necessarily think we needed a name. We just wanted the best person for the role. And blissfully, we got both. Annie came in, and she has such an obvious humanity and something in her that just makes you want to root for her no matter what she's doing, which is hugely important for this role. And we knew she could do comedy. Everyone knows she can do comedy, but she blew us away when we asked her to do the single camera stuff. She can do everything. And it's a really hard balancing act, but she and Mary Hollis Imboden, who plays Patty, they both have to go back and forth between those two worlds and do it beautifully. They somehow are the same person, but put on a different face when they're in that multicam versus when they're alone.
I mean, it's obviously a feminist show, but would there be a Kevin Can Fuck Himself TV show without the Time's Up and Me Too movements?
I actually wrote it before Time's Up or Me Too. I thought of it and wrote the pilot, which was a very different original pilot than the one that aired, for the better. I mean, it went through a development process and stuff. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think that after the 2016 election, there was a real frustration and anger. I think without that election, I wouldn't have thought twice when I heard that podcast about those women going out for those roles. I wouldn't have been tapped into that sense of injustice. And I think that I was, you know, feeling the same thing that those women felt 3 or 4 months later when they started actually telling their stories. And, you know, I remember when that happened thinking, oh my God, we care what women have to say now? Maybe there's an audience for this show. I really don't know. And sadly, I think that this show will always feel relevant. I mean, as long as women are frustrated and unheard. And, you know, I long for the day where this show feels of the past.
Valérie, you said in an interview that Allison thinks Kevin is the problem when he's in fact just a symptom. What did you mean by that?
I think she thinks of him as unto himself, as a unique problem that is keeping her down, and that none of the rest of the world can see it. And he has somehow, you know, gotten away with this forever, him alone. When really, even in her own house, Neil and Pete do the exact same thing that Kevin does. They cause that multicam, they get away with the same stuff. They are similarly very destructive. And I think very similar to how she is in the pilot, it's just the way her brain works. She thinks that she can be happy, she can be fulfilled, she will be done once in the pilot, once she moves, once they get out of that place and away from those people. Her husband will change, her life will change. And then at the end of the pilot, she realizes that's not going to happen. But then her goal just changes. Her mindset doesn't. She thinks when she kills her husband, she will be done, she will be fulfilled, she will be all set. And the reality is, obviously, if she kills her husband, her problems are not just going to go away. She's still going to be her. And also, that system that propped Kevin up, that made Kevin who he is, that laughing audience isn't going to go away just because he's gone. It's going to follow someone else. There are probably millions of Kevins out there in that universe, and she will continue to run into them. So I think that she has to work on herself and realize her own complicity and how she got herself into that situation, as much as she needs to consider how destructive Kevin actually is.
You have a whole host of anger and emotions and feelings, and you think it's this one tiny little thing, you know, and because it's easier to just think that and solve that, you know, because the bigger problem seems insurmountable, you know. But the fact that it seems easier to kill your husband than to deal with, you know, I mean, that's how big the issue is. It's like, well, I can't solve that, but I can do this, you know?
It's easier to kill him than to actually tell him what you need and how, like, to actually confront him.
So we've talked about it a little bit, but this show is also about going from one genre to another. You had to establish some rules for the sitcom and the dramedy to coexist. For instance, Kevin never appears outside of the sitcom. Can you tell me about these rules?
Sure. Pretty early on, I just, in thinking of the show by myself, I decided that you would never get an explanation. It's a metaphor. It's just how this world is presented. I consider Neil, Kevin, and Pete to be multicam catalysts. Whenever they are on screen, it is a multicam, and those scenes have to fit into their own little multicam story that could air on CBS. They follow CBS standards and practices, like the whole bit. And that when the minute they are off screen, it's a single camera. And you can hear them. You know, we realized that only in post. We were never sure how that would work, if you could hear Kevin while you were in single camera. And it turns out it's fantastic if you do. It really helps things.
So Anna, these rules also apply for the directing of the show. You're basically directing two different shows in one. I suppose it's a first. How did you approach it, and how do you manage to keep those two shows connected?
Directing multicam was new for me, and it was very interesting and challenging because as a director, you always want your actors to be on the move. You know, like they're doing things, they're moving, they have business. And then when you get to a multicam stage, you're like, oh, they're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. They're just standing there. There might be a little bit of movement to like accentuate a joke, but like you're literally doing nothing. But it was unbelievable and really exciting to use the multicam sets as single cam sets because everything changes once you put the fourth wall in. Each time there was a transition, it was not just a physical transition, it was an emotional transition. So making sure that whatever it is that was emotionally happening in the multicam is really left behind at the door, but completely driving her, what's in this case, Allison's emotional state once she goes through the door. So it was really, really fun, actually.
And are there two different sets for each room because between the sitcom and the dramedy, the living room looks dramatically different?
No, we would just for the sitcom, much like sitcoms that are filmed on stages in LA or New York or whatever, we would bow out the walls and take out the fourth wall, and people would play to an audience. We had a very small audience due to COVID, but then when it was time to shoot the single cam, walls come back in, they get bowed back in, and fourth one gets dropped in there, and that's
like the position of a lamp might change, and like that's about it. It's incredible how different lighting and making those walls real and adding a ceiling, it felt completely authentic in that way. And then when I walked into that living room for the first time when it was set up for single camera, I thought, oh my God, this is every living room I went into as a kid, every friend's living room.
It was big enough to film stuff, like we didn't cramp ourselves, but you could definitely feel with that extra wall in there that it was like a little prison.
Valérie and Craig, was it a deliberate choice for you to put a woman behind the camera for 6 out of 8 episodes?
Yes. Yes. I mean, really, it was, it started out, we had our pilot director was Lynn Shelton, and just tragically, we lost her in between when we were waiting for COVID to figure out COVID stuff. She passed away in May, and we sort of took a minute to find out who to replace her. And we went with Oz Rodriguez, who did a wonderful job with the first 2 episodes and came at it with such a different perspective and really, really built the world with us and also kept Lynn's vision alive, which was wonderful. And then for our second block, we had already met Anna and hired her to direct our original episode 7.
Yeah, we had 7 for Anna and 8 for Oz. Yeah. And then Oz switched off to do 1 and 2, and Anna did the rest of them.
And so we had Anna for 3 and 4, and she was so collaborative and brilliant. It's because you are a woman and you get it. You get the rage that I felt that went into that script that goes into that show inherently.
While COVID was extremely challenging on many, many levels, I think it really contributed to creating a sort of a creative cocoon that we were all in because we were so close and we couldn't do anything. This was pre-vaccines.
Is the show an homage or a criticism of the sitcom genre, or a little bit of both?
I think it is absolutely both because, as I said, I love sitcoms. I don't want to make fun of them. I think they're so hard to write and when they were done well. And I think that you can love something and appreciate it and still point out where it's lacking and what needs to be adjusted. Craig and I said really early on, we don't want to make fun of a sitcom. We don't want to wink at it. We tried our hardest to make a sitcom that we would watch, that we enjoyed.
Just as far as the commentary on that genre goes, if we had decided to just make fun of sitcoms, it doesn't work.
So about the pacing, the multicam, I mean, what was amazing about Craig is like being on set on the multicam days, it literally was a case of like, okay, this joke's not landing right. Something sounds off about it. Like, how do we fix it? But the multicam comedy had to land. Otherwise, it doesn't work at all. There's no room for parody within that format. So I was always very appreciative. Something
that struck me with your show is how sitcom can be really creepy when we start seeing the little cracks underneath the laughs. So the title card, for instance, is exactly showing that the laughs becoming an uncomfortable noise. How did you first realize that sitcom had this creepiness that was just waiting to be revealed?
I thought of it visually first, and then as I thought more about it, as I think most ideas that have sort of legs do, I realized that it meant so much more, like it than just the visual of it. It had a whole lot to say, and that genre was so interesting to look at in a new way. And the more you think about any sitcom that you know and love, the more you're like, huh, that's not so great what they did. And I think it was just realizing that so much of the humor comes at someone else's expense. Realizing that and wanting to comment on that opens up, like you said, some creepiness.
But that stuck with us, where we were like, oh yeah, there is just inherently a creepy thing to an audience really giving like crazy approval to something that doesn't really need that much approval, if any.
And back to Allison, she finds confidence and sisterhood. She feels a little bit more in control, but could the show continue on if Allison finds true happiness?
Happiness is something that happens sometimes during some days in some moments. For Allison, I don't think she has yet realized that. I think that she thinks happiness is an end goal. And until she sort of figures that out, that she'll never get there, I think that she is sort of like Sisyphus.
So, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.